Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Welcome. I'm very curious how many of you have come from outside, let's say, the Fresno metropolitan area to be here today? Would you raise your hand? All right. Look at all of y'all. Welcome, welcome, welcome so much to our community and to our region. We are absolutely delighted to be hosting this annual conference. It is a real treat and privilege for us. My name is Ashley Swearingen. I'm with the Central Valley Community Foundation. I'm an alum of this very esteemed campus, and being here today brought back a lot of memories. As I was looking for the parking thing and as I was thinking, gosh, we didn't have these fancy eateries when I was here as a student, but it is amazing to be on the campus of Fresno State. So grateful for the partnership between Stanford and Fresno State and all of the institutes that have come together at Fresno State to work with Stanford and the Lane Center. Thank you so much for all of your work to get us here. I am excited about this next panel for reasons that we're going to go into. When you stop and consider our economy, our sense of place, the communities who are here, the issues and the opportunities that we're experiencing that we see in front of us, it's a really interesting time. She said slightly sarcastically, it's a really interesting time. And, you know, land is such a driver of our history in this region, and we're seeing it play out in very dramatic ways, and particularly in our current economy, the way we use our land, whether it's for food production, coming soon to a rural community near you, large scale solar already happening, habitat, like the way we use our land is just a very profound thing that we experience here in the Central San Joaquin Valley, particularly because if you think about it, we're a land-based economy. I mean, I know it's true to say, like every place in California, like, land is really important. But think of it for a second. Like, what other parts of the state do with their land to generate opportunity to sustain life? Like, it's really different. Like a 100-acre business park that potentially is generating billions of dollars of value just in that one spot. And how much more activity there is in that one dedicated spot relative to our place here where, like, and I'll speak from experience having worked in local government at the city of Fresno, like there's just many decades of tradition of, if we're not subdividing, if we're not taking out farmland, if we're not taking out open space to convert it to residential development, I mean, our recent history, it feels like our economy is not moving forward. I mean, just if you just stop and think about the way in which land is so interwoven with everything we're experiencing here in our region, that just gives you a sense of why this panel is so important and a great way to kick off more conversation today. By the way, Mas Masamoto, where's Mas? Mas still in the room? Okay, so not to embarrass you, Mas, but there may or may not have been, he's a genius, kinds of texts happening while you're speaking. Mas is one of our board members at the Community Foundation. Paul Gibson, he's here and one of our board members. And we get to see this genius all the time. But Mas, thank you for making climate so tactile and emotional as we're sitting there. It's like, oh, Mas brings it home every time. And Marcy, thank you so much. All right. So joining me here on this panel, you're going to get to hear from each of these speakers here in just a moment. Let me read their bios. I'm going to just do a few slides to set some context around our conversation as well. Then I'm going to hand it off to the experts who join us today, beginning with Roman Raintree. Roman is a Native American community advocate and organizer, tribally indigenous to California's Central Valley. He is a member of the Dunlap Band of Mono Indians and a descendant of the Chunumni and Wuchumni Yokuts tribes. Roman is deeply committed to preserving his tribe's cultures, identities, and existence as they face the ongoing challenges of cultural genocide and extinction regarding lawful California state and federal acknowledgement. Roman, we're so grateful that you could join us today. Just quick note, we're also going to see Roman depart perhaps a little bit early to take care of some family obligations. So don't everybody leave, when Roman does. Like, he's the only one with the hall pass at 3:15. The rest of us are staying here. To Roman's left is David Shabazian. David is spending a lot of time these days in the Central San Joaquin Valley. We're so grateful. But it's not the first time. He's got a background growing up on a family farm in California, San Joaquin Valley, in Turlock, if I am getting it straight, Turlock. He earned his degrees in agricultural economics and regional planning from UC Davis that shaped his passion for land use and natural resource stewardship. During his 20 years of planning experience in the Sacramento region, he brought together diverse stakeholders to balance natural resource conservation and urban growth, creating tools to map and analyze strategies to enhance both environmental and economic resilience. Most recently, David served as the director of the Department of Conservation in the California Natural Resources Agency from 2019 to 2024. There, he led initiatives to enhance watershed function, achieve carbon neutrality, reduce hazards, and promote sustainable economic development through his natural and working lands framework. His efforts support the California Jobs First initiative, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on today, emphasizing that natural resources are vital to the economy and to the community well-being. David is now consulting with us at the Central Valley Community Foundation on the implementation of this Jobs First strategy in our region called Sierra-San Joaquin. He serves on several boards, including the State Board of Food and Ag and the UC Davis College Agricultural and Environmental Sciences Dean's Advisory Council. Welcome, David. Thank you for being with us this whole week. David is actually down doing a marathon stint here with us in Fresno. And next to David's left, Dr. Logan Robertson Hecker, who is the CEO of the Sequoia Riverlands Trust. She joined the organization in 2020, was appointed to her role in October of 2021. Logan has worked for more than 2 decades in the nonprofit and education sectors in California, Guatemala, and Honduras. Her work at the Sequoia Riverlands Trust leverages her professional experience and expands upon her deep commitment to the natural and agricultural legacy of the Sierra foothills and the Central Valley. She has experience leading nonprofit organizations and publicly funded programs, managing staff teams, spearheading collaborative initiatives, and implementing federal, state, and local policies. We're seeing this firsthand in our region now as she and her team are leading a critical part of work for the Jobs Initiative that I mentioned earlier. Throughout her work, we know what this is like in the nonprofit sector. She's been active in identifying and securing government foundation funding sources, cultivating new relationships, fostering connections with current supporters. She holds a PhD in education from the University of California at Santa Barbara. She served on the faculty of the Bard College Master of Arts and Teaching program, as well as nonprofit boards. She lives in outside of Three Rivers with her family. All right, let's jump in. Just a couple of kind of framing comments. Here we go. And you might be asking, because of course you are, like, why is a community foundation involved in all this kind of stuff? Like, I thought y'all just did local grant making. And yes, we do these things. But in a region like ours, our board, our leadership team as a staff, we've resolved that it's not enough for us as an organization to wait for money to come to us and then be like, sure, we'll give it out. Like maybe in 400 years, we'll have enough money to make a difference in our region. But the reality is our region is at a critical, potentially perilous, but also a lot of positive opportunities that we're right on the cusp of if we can just figure out strategies to execute against and ensure that we have people working together, fundraising, going after big things for our region, and then measuring our results. So at the Community Foundation, we've resolved like, hey, somebody's got to kind of step up and create a platform for people to come together. And a lot of the work that we do is all about that. And sometimes it just starts simply with who is most impacted by this issue we're trying to resolve. Are they actively engaged? If not, can we support them in becoming actively engaged? Who has jurisdiction over aspects of this issue? And what we find, so many of our challenges in this region, and really throughout this conference, you guys are focusing here, like a lot of these issues sort of fall between the cracks of sort of who's in charge of what. So we find at the Community Foundation that we have a role to play in bringing people together, supporting those people, and developing smart investable plans, attracting dollars, and measuring the results of our work. So that's us. This is a look at something that we have been supporting in partnership with Roman, with David's help, Logan's help, and a whole bunch of other people, something called the Sierra-San Joaquin Jobs Initiative. In partnership with the Newsom administration, the state government, for the first time in a really long time, I am now one of those people who stands up in front of groups of people and says things like, 25 years ago was the last time we had any sort of a sustainable economic development plan for the state. 25 years ago, I was sitting in rooms like this, hearing older people say it, and now I am that person. Like, I'm a little like, oh, okay. Am I just going to own it? Yeah, I'm just going to own it. My staff team gets tired of hearing me say it. But it's been a long time since the state has taken a minute to figure out, like, all right, we got to be intentional around a job strategy for the state. We have a tremendous amount of income inequality and disparity in our state. Like this, it cannot be true that we have just dramatic prosperity and then the complete opposite of that throughout the state. So the governor put together an initiative called the Jobs First Initiative, balancing environment, equity, and economy. And we at the Community Foundation got a bunch of our friends together to work on this plan. And that was us at our kickoff meeting. This is the 4-county region that represents our regional economy, our commute shed, essentially. We organized around this major question. Basically, what's it going to take? Like, here's where we're at today. Here's where we'd like to be. What's it going to take to get there? And that launched us into about a 2-year, at this point, planning process. We've landed on an organizing framework that identifies climate solutions as economic opportunity. Responsible food and ag, an underlying part of our economy here, transitioning that ag economy to resilient, regenerative, and to sustainable food production. And then advanced and circular manufacturing. Essentially, we want to make more of the stuff that we use here. And especially burdens us when we hear things like our small farmers, our medium-sized farmers saying, I can't find the equipment I need in the US. Like, we got to find it from other parts of the world and bring it here. And we just think, golly gee, can we not invent and create that here? Fresno State, UC Merced have been huge partners in our work in that space with both ag tech innovation and manufacturing. We also acknowledge like essential infrastructure, water and broadband. This is true across the valley floor. And then, of course, things that are beneficial to local communities, local economies in the context of this regional economy, small business, community health, community-based healthcare workforce, education, and community benefits planning. So with that framework in place, we set about an investment plan sprint last year. Some of my colleagues who are here who went through that, we are still working through the trauma of producing a 500-page open source collaborative strategic planning document in 8 weeks. That was not easy. And yet our region came together and did it. And here you're seeing a picture of the back of my head, which we're all happy that she combed her hair that day, because who knew that she'd be handing this plan to Governor Newsom. And now we're looking at this photo, but more importantly, the plan that lives at s2j2initiative.org. Now, that's the background here. I'm going to transition to our panelists, but maybe just land with this last point before I hand off. And that is, as we started assessing, like, who are we as a place right now? What are the opportunities? What are the barriers, et cetera? It became very clear that our past efforts had been very focused on sort of start with the urban areas, start with the businesses that are already here. And that makes sense for a lot of reasons. But as we started to contemplate opportunities in a climate economy, it was like, wait a second, sort of the reverse of that instinct came to the fore. And it was our natural resources, our open space, our natural and working lands. Like, it's always been true, but it is particularly acute right now. What's happening outside our cities is going to determine whether or not we're here in another 100 years, 200 years, et cetera. So we really kind of pivoted our focus from traditional economic development to a resources-based framework for, like, how are we actually going to live here, work here, and sustain life and planet. So anyway, that's the big question that we're seizing right now. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Roman, and we'll go down the line. Then we'll take some questions with each other and then talk with you guys. All right?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the, excuse me, I'm the tribal liaison for the S2J2 Tribal Initiative. I'm actually one of two. I represent and work mostly with the non-affiliated acknowledged tribes, of which I am. The Yokuts and the Noom people. The Noom is actually the word we use in our language. Mono isn't a word in our lexicon. Noom is how we refer to ourselves, and like Yokuts, it means a human being. So I thought it'd be good to start with trying to provide some sort of perspective as to our insight. And especially because Mr. Matsumoto had talked about stories. I thought that was a perfect segue, because so much in our life is related to stories and relationship with those stories. So how do you see the world? Usually I like to present it. You know, usually when you look at it, you have north, east, west, and south, the four. But in a tribal setting, we have 6 directions, very common, sometimes even 8, to represent the past and the future. But you'll see the up and the down, and to the left of it is a Hopi map. It's actually considered a living, breathing entity. It's flexible to change. but it tells a story of their sites and their homeland, and everything is rooted very much back to stories directly related to the land in which they are born onto, their ancestral homeland. And so here it just acknowledging above and below reflects a cosmology that situates humanity within a living, breathing system. And so when we talk about the land, we acknowledge that it's a relative, it's a member of the family, in short. And so in California, we have the most tribally diverse state in all of America. And therefore, most of our tribes in California are not federally acknowledged. And so what that in short means is that most of our tribes are lawfully not considered Native American. So myself being a member of a unlawfully tribe, so to speak, I'm not considered Native American, and certain rights and privileges don't protect me. So 1 in 3 California tribes currently seeking federal tribal acknowledgement is indigenous to Fresno County. Fresno County has the most tribes seeking this acknowledgement than any other county in America. And so why don't you really hear more about us? That goes back to our stories, promoting the positive, moving from a place of love and not so much focusing on the negative. It comes from our origin stories and telling us that we must walk in a good way. The Dene, the Navajo, they call it walking in beauty. And that's really everything that we try to do comes from that. And so that's why you don't really see tribes protesting on such mass numbers in that sense. Oops. And so I guess with that, I just like to say, to segue into the non-federally acknowledged tribes, most of those tribes, in order to cultivate a relationship with the land, they have to figure out a way to receive grants and even partnerships. So a lot of them have segued into 501c3s. The 501c3 allows them to receive those grants, allows them to disperse it, but they have no ownership to the land very often. The Wachumni tribe in Porterville, in Visalia, they have a very close relationship with the Quaker tribe. And they're allowed to have a piece of their ancestral homeland to conduct ceremony, to conduct traditional gatherings, and all that comes back to storytelling. It tells us and informs us as a community, as individuals, of who we are, how we relate to the land, where we came from, and most importantly, where we're going. And so if you were to look at the tribes here in the Central Valley and anywhere really, you have 2 that are non-federally acknowledged and federally acknowledged. And the reason why is those that are non-federally acknowledged never had their treaties ratified into law. And so they were just consequently dealt with in another manner with regards to their federal status. So the tribes that are federally acknowledged, you'll see very often in this region, they have casinos. So their focus is a little bit more specific in a sense. It is, they have a home base to work on. And while they're still working with that same mantra and belief of moving forward, thinking about 7 generations ahead, just as a non-federally acknowledged, they have a land base and they're also recognized as a sovereign nation. And so you'll see a lot of them in their grants that are funding. They're looking for building housing, developing their community. If you look at Lemoore and Tachi, they have their own gas station now. They have their own market. They even have their own movie center and bowling alley out there. They are moving what they said they were going to do when the passage of casinos came into law, is that they were going to, with self-determination, seek and find self-reliance, where they didn't have to rely on anybody else, the government, that they can all take care of themselves and self-contained. And so they have a school out there, and they're constantly trying to infill and develop their, not just to track folks back, but also to plan for the future. How are we going to plan for our youth, the ones that are not even born, and how are we going to match that? And so you can see that in the non-federally recognized or federally recognized, that ceremony is very much at the core. Right now in Lemoore, they're having a 3-day conference, an economic conference, but coinciding with that is also a 4-day ceremony for the tribal people. So things like that are very important because stories are exchanged. But for the non-federally acknowledged tribes, like the tribe of the Dumna Yokuts in Friant, they're the ancestral tribe whose homeland is beneath the water at the dam. They weren't able to have a ceremony or a ceremonial gathering for 50 years. The first time they had one was in 2002. It had been 50 years since they had something like that. And that's because of access to the land. And so when you don't have access to the land, you are threatening a culture, a language, and pretty much a way of life that is directly correlated to that specific land in which those folks are ancestrally indigenous to. And so you can kind of see how the two are operating in almost different fashions. I mean, you have what the casinos are really doing is allowing them to be self-reliant and allowing them to explore with technology and the revenue, like Tule River is with solar development and electronic vehicles on their reservation. But the non-federally acknowledged, again, they're just confined to, can we just have access? And so they've moved away from a federal acknowledgement just to a land back. Can we have land back and access to the land? Because if we don't have access to that, DNA-wise, we'll remain Native American as far as blood quantum is concerned, but our language, our customs, and our very existence to the land is going to diminish. And that's what you kind of see now. And so I just like to say, you know, the S2J2 has allowed us to really come together as a community and really imagine together for the first time tribally to explore our future collectively and also for the future in our generation. So I really want to thank you for your time and thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you for having me here today. A little hard to follow, but I'm gonna get kind of clinical on you here. I'm an economist, which, you know, the two-hand joke and all that stuff. So on the one hand, I am here to talk to you about the land and the importance of it. And I'm also here to talk to you about the economy and the importance of that. Ashley touched on that. I really appreciate Roman's comments, Moss's comments, because one of the things I think is really important for us to think about is this term natural and working lands. And, you know, I want to kick this off by saying, you know, the working lands part, I think we understand pretty well, right? We derive a lot of value from our landscape: food, building materials, water, recreation. But I think we're hearing it, and I just want to say it out loud to kind of kick off my presentation, which is, you know, that working part, it really is contingent on the natural part functioning well. And if the natural part starts breaking down, it's going to be harder and harder for us to derive that value from the landscape that is so important for our economy, both just underpinning our economy, but then also these value chains that come out of these materials that we pull off of our working lands. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at this. And I'm kind of look at it kind of clinically, because this is an economic conversation that I'm teeing up here. And it's a planning conversation. So as Ashley talked about earlier, you know, a lot of planning in this region is around urban. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is kind of flipping that on its head and talking about, well, what is regional planning? So I'm going to go way back in time to 2008 when I was at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and basically trying to answer this question of what is regional planning. We had just finished a very large plan about smart growth, and smart growth was an urban activity. And, you know, we got a lot of accolades for that, but both the state and federal resource agencies and departments said, okay, cool, great. Yeah, that's keeping pressure off the land, but what are you going to do with the rest of that land? And we were like, that's right. I mean, if we're going to act as a region, you know, we can't just look at the urban parts of our region. We need to look at both urban and rural. So, you know, what's our future and how do we prepare for it is the key question on the table. And we can't prepare for it by just continuing to grow our communities and sticking our head in a tunnel and looking only at that. We need to look at the whole landscape because we are dependent on that. We need to then ask the question, who are we partnering with? So, you know, what government does is a signal to the private sector. So if you're, you know, putting together plans and you're doing, you know, corridor beautifications and things like that, those are signals to the developers, for example, like, hey, that's a good place maybe to invest because the city or the county is putting a bunch of money there, so maybe we should too. But we don't do that on the rural side of the equation. We don't hardly do anything, quite frankly. We let the private sector do what it's doing on the landscape. But again, our communities are dependent on what's happening on that landscape. They are embedded in that landscape. And so what we really need to look at is this rural-urban connection. We need to look at, in this region, the whole 9 million acres, not just the communities within that 9 million acres. And so I'm going to talk to you about this approach of looking at, a much larger landscape and really digging in. And again, I put this slide up because, we really need to acknowledge and take stock of the fact that on a day-to-day basis, we are consuming products that come from our rural spaces, from our open lands, food, water, all the stuff I just talked about, building materials, but also we're going into, a green economy. We need minerals from our landscape, and pretty soon from our landscape, we're going to need electricity, right? We need more and more power to run this economy. And as Ashley mentioned earlier, that's a big opportunity here. So, this slide kind of says a lot about how we are connected to the landscape. And I just think it's important to flash that up because we need to continue to remind ourselves that, where our quality of life comes from. The problem is, this is a policy map, right? This is a composite map of the Sacramento region. And this is a policy map, right? This is a general plan map. We took all the general plans and put them together and made one composite map for the 6 counties. If this is a policy map, so what's the policy for rural, right? You have all these colors telling you what the policies are for inside of the urban boundary, but what's the policy for rural? Do you have one policy? Is that it? Do you have one zoning designation? So this is a bad starting point if you're going to think like a region. And if you're going to take into consideration your resources as your underpinning, that's not a good start, right? That's an urban perspective of the world. So what we did is we built a rural perspective of the world. And we said, well, we were focused mainly on agriculture at that time. We said, okay, well, what does the landscape look like from a rural perspective, and especially from an agricultural perspective? And we basically built a general plan of agriculture for the 6-county region. This was pretty novel in 2008, but it worked, right? I remember putting this map out in front of the board members at SACOG, and the room went silent because they were like, wait, what is that? And we said, well, it's the crops that we grow in the region. And then they said, well, where did you get that? And we said, well, we had to make it because there's no data source for looking at these rural spaces. So that is, that's what I want to, kind of put on the table again, is we need information to understand where we're going, what we're doing, and particularly in our rural spaces. Because then once you do that, it allows you to start thinking about how do you derive value from your rural spaces. If you know what's out there, you start to put some numbers to it like we did. This is a case study we did of looking at the Sacramento County portion of the Delta. They wanted to look at what are the opportunities in the Bay Area food markets, and how do they tap into that? So we looked at the soil that's in the Delta in Sacramento County. We looked at the markets in the Bay Area, and we basically connected the two and said, you can grow these crops which are in demand in the Bay Area, and this is how much you can grow. This is how much you can put into market channels. So now that we have the information, we can actually start to run numbers. We can start to run scenarios and do case studies like this. And the tool just works like this. You say, oh, we're going to convert to higher value crops. So in this case, this was converting alfalfa to prunes. Okay, in 2010, when we did this, prunes was actually a hot market. They were called dried plums then. And the joke was, well, we see an aging society, so prunes are a good market, right? We're gonna kill it in prunes. But what we did is we said, okay, we're gonna turn the crank on the model now that we have this information, and we're gonna look at things like how does the value change on that 2,000 acres? What kind of return on investment do you get? How much water do you need? In this case, the water demand actually went down. We needed more labor, which that's a problem, unfortunately, but it also maybe is an opportunity if we actually have workforce. And we put fewer trucks on the road. So that was actually helped us then hit our targets for reducing emissions. But we didn't answer these questions. And this is what we're starting to get into now here in this region is, well, what's the change in emissions? How do we reduce those? What's the groundwater recharge potential? What's the habitat potential? But more importantly is, okay, this 2,000 acres and many other acres like that, what's the impact on the region? What are we looking at in terms of changes across this landscape in the crops that are being grown, the value they create, the jobs they create, the markets they can tap into? And this is, this is clearly a rural question, But oops, did I go past my slide? I guess I'm missing a slide now. But it's also an urban question, and here's why. Because most of the activity in food and agriculture is in urban areas, believe it or not. Most of the value, most of the jobs are actually urban. And we looked at studies of, okay, well, what if you connect the landscape to the community? You have to do it through an aggregation, processing, and distribution facility. We modeled out a food hub that was scaled for Sacramento, basically, so a smaller scale food hub. But we looked at the economics of it. We actually designed it. We operated it kind of theoretically, looked at how long it would take to pay it off, how much food it could process. And then we also said, well, you have to connect it to the land. Have to connect it to that rural area. How many acres do you need to actually operate that facility? And so we basically also studied the impacts on, changing the rural complexion to reflect what's happening in the urban space and the demand for that food. And then we took it a step further and we said, okay, we understand that this activity is happening in the urban space, but how do we talk to the urban areas and the consumers and the community about why agriculture and land conservation and land stewardship is important? And it's because that's where the money is, right? Follow the money. So if you look at this cluster of food and agriculture, it's actually incredibly competitive with other industries. And once people started seeing this, they said, oh, wait, how come we're not doing that now? Or why did we lose so much of this? And how do we bring it back? So we were able to change the conversation and make sure that when they start to talk about these opportunities in the food space, that they understand that you need land, right, to grow food, to then bring those opportunities into the community. And lo and behold, if you look at the hot spots of where the activity is, it's in urban areas, right? You need all this land around those blue dots to grow the food that then the value is added in those blue areas. And look at these numbers. Twice as many jobs in urban areas as in rural areas when it comes to food and ag. This is growing specialty crops, and 4 times the value in urban areas compared to rural areas when you calculate all that value in the supply chain. Okay, so is agriculture and food, is it rural or is it urban? I would say it's both, right? And so, but we need to look at it that way. And again, going back to that policy map, we don't do that, or we don't do it very well, and we don't do it very often. So once you do that, then you can start saying, okay, we're planning for this, right? We need to move product to market. What routes are important, right? So I was working for a transportation planning organization. This became a very important question. If we're going to support this industry, what routes do we need to pay attention to for investment, right? These trucks are carrying, in some cases, they're going down dirt roads to get to the crop and then pull it into market. Where do we possibly need to make improvements so that those trucks have an easier access to the crop and to the market? And then we also needed to look at a lot of other questions, right? Of course, water supply. We're always going to be talking about water supply from this point on, and we've always been talking about it since we were established as a state. We need to look at the impact on our rural communities, right? So is this going to hurt them or is this going to help them? We certainly hope it's going to help them, especially if you look at processing facilities that are scaled to the local and regional markets. They can fit really nicely into these rural communities. We need labor supply. That's a given, right? But what are we going to do to attract that labor? Look, we're in competition for labor. And so the more that we can showcase that this is a place where labor wants to come and work and get paid well and have a place to live, and have amenities, we're gonna compete really well to have that limited labor supply come into the region. And then recreation and tourism, that's a big deal. A lot of farms make a lot of money off of visits. Okay, so we can't forget about that. So these are all components of this ecosystem that is both urban and rural. And then last but not least, we have to think about the ecosystem services, back to where I started, that if this land, well managed, okay, conserved and well managed, can not only produce food or other products, but it can also support the habitat that is so critical to maintaining, the incredible biodiversity we have in this state. It's just unbelievable what we have here. I mean, this place is amazing, not only in the food that it can grow, but also the biodiversity that we have here and many other things. But it won't be around if we don't take care of it. So switching gears, now jumping to today, Ashley mentioned this is part of S2J2. So what we're doing is the same thing I just showed you, but now we're updating it. We're bringing in more contemporary information, and we have a new target in mind, which is energy production. So we need land to produce energy. That land is a new activity on the landscape, or a growing activity on the landscape. But if we're going to do this again in a holistic fashion, again, there's an urban component to this, but in this case, that land is going to be competing with other uses of the land. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we are aware of what the objectives are, that we are carving out areas as much as possible for certain activities that we're looking for. We still want agriculture, but we want, more land restoration, rewilding, more habitat and open space. We're looking for park space. We're looking for areas where we can recharge groundwater. We're looking for energy production sites, right? So we're looking for all these uses of the land that are going to start to compete with each other. Planning and having good information about the landscape is how we are going to be able to navigate that. That's how we're going to be able to figure out, how do we balance this, and what is it that what do we want to put where? And how do we have conversations then with our communities and the leaders of our communities about this larger vision for these 4 counties and how they fit into that? So back to mapping again. So now we can start to look at the assets that we have in this region and put them together to start having a conversation, a well-informed conversation, not an ideological conversation, but a well-informed conversation about what do we have here today, what do we want in the future, and how do we get there? So here's our communities, here's existing conserved land. This is a map of the Department of Fish and Wildlife's perspective on where there are opportunities for connectivity, habitat connectivity in particular, but other conservation opportunities. This is a map of prime agriculture in the region. This is a map of groundwater recharge potentials, like the higher potential areas for groundwater recharge. So as you can see, we're starting to build an inventory of data, data of the assets that this region has. And then we put them together to start looking at scenarios, like different ways of using the landscape. Okay, so this one is one where you're emphasizing agriculture and groundwater recharge. So we're looking for that combination of the crops that you can grow in areas where when you need to flood them, you flood them because you're getting that water back down into the aquifer, right? So this is a scenario. This is one of many ideas that we can test out because we now have the information and a set of tools to do that. We can also test out like really going, full throttle on conservation. So if we're going to, here's kind of an extreme scenario, but it's one of like, we're just going to hit the throttle on conservation, and this is what it looks like, right? So now you have 2 scenarios that you can start to compare and contrast. And then here's a third, which is the clean energy production, right? What would be good places to site clean energy production in the future? You look at transmission lines, you look at substations, those start to become anchors. You look at, areas that are conducive then to, installing solar in particular, maybe some wind. We're also looking at other opportunities in biomass and other forms of energy generation. So now again, another scenario that you can use, and then sit down at a table and say, okay, here are some kind of, we'll call them boundary conditions in these kind of more extreme maps. Let's have a conversation about how do you get into the middle, right? How do you take these ideas and these objectives and kind of put them together into one map that can guide the region going forward? So I won't go through these questions. These are questions that we're putting to the team that's going to be working on land use planning and permitting, but we're starting a conversation around this, right? Thinking differently about how do you fit together with your neighboring communities to put together something that is a larger effort that benefits everyone here. So that is the conversation that we're starting. Again, we're starting with good information. We're not going into the room with ideology and just kind of, pie in the sky ideas. We're actually trying to ground that with real information. I'm going to leave with this thought, which is, I've talked about this a lot, but I do think we're in a period where, and Ashley said this earlier, we're shifting our paradigm. We're thinking about, okay, what do we really need first and foremost if we're going to continue to be successful in our communities and we're going to maintain our quality of life? And so planning has as long as, planning has been a thing, a profession, has been mostly about our communities, right? The rural areas outside of our communities have been an afterthought. So that's what I'm calling kind of inside out planning. Okay. We're at a point in time where we need to make sure that those resources are going to be there for us to maintain and support our communities going forward into the future. That's where we need to look from the outside in. We need to plan around our communities, I think before, but at least at the same time as we plan for what's happening inside of our communities. That's a holistic approach to the landscape. That's a holistic approach to our regions staying healthy and vibrant going forward. And that's what we're doing here with S2J2 and Ashley and her folks. And I hope it's just the beginning. I hope to see this kind of, infect other parts of the state, if not beyond, because I really think that, going forward, especially with climate change and other pressures on our landscape, that we really need to think about those basic things: food, shelter, clothing, energy, coming into our communities. So with that, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Logan Robertson Hecker. As Ashley mentioned earlier, I'm the Executive Director of Sequoia Riverlands Trust. And I'm here today to talk about the future of working lands in the Southern San Joaquin Valley. Our organization is committed to balancing land conservation and land transitions to ensure a sustainable, thriving future for our communities, our agricultural economy, and our environment. Today, I'm going to share a little bit about how our SRT, Sequoia Riverlands Trust, is navigating these transitions and creating opportunities for resilience. One of the questions that we ask ourselves all the time is, how do we balance the urgent need for sustainability while preserving the agricultural heritage and economic stability of our region? It's not a simple answer, but we believe that it is achievable through strategic conservation, responsible land repurposing, and community-driven solutions. So a little bit about our organization. Sequoia Riverlands Trust was founded in the year 2000, and we are a nationally accredited regional nonprofit land trust dedicated to conserving the natural and agricultural legacy of California's heartland. Our work spans across the southern Sierra Nevada, southern San Joaquin Valley, and even into the Carrizo Plain in San Luis Obispo County, protecting over 44,000 acres of vital landscapes. As a land trust, we're a partner to landowners, steward of nature preserves, and a catalyst for innovative solutions in land and water management. We work really at the intersection of agriculture, conservation, and community resilience, ensuring that the decisions that we make today benefit generations to come. So our mission is simple. We conserve the lands and waters of California's heartland, but our impact is really profound. Conservation is not just about preserving beautiful landscapes. It's about biodiversity, sustainable working lands, and economic resilience. We really believe that by working together, communities, tribes, growers and ranchers, policymakers, we can create solutions that benefit both people and nature. Land conservation isn't just an environmental issue, it's an economic and a cultural one as well, as the previous speakers definitely showed. So we approach conservation and land management through three key focus areas. As you can see, conservation of private lands. This is where we protect habitat and agricultural land through sustainable practices and conservation easements. Stewardship of nature preserves, ensuring habitat protection and ecological restoration of over 4,000 acres of nature preserves in Tulare and Kings counties. Many of these preserves are public access. A couple of them are public access to dawn to dusk, 365 days a year. We think it's really important, this role that we play in providing opportunities for people to access open space and nature. And then finally, education and outreach, engaging the community, supporting workforce development, and fostering the next generation of land stewards. We have field trips out at our preserves almost every day. We have high school internships that run year-round during the school year and sometimes even in the summer. And we have volunteer projects going on year-round as well. Interwoven with each of these three areas is our work with tribes, which is one of the aspects of our work that I find the most inspiring at the moment. Thinking about private lands, Roman mentioned earlier the Wukchumni tribe, which is outside of Visalia, and there's a relationship that the Wukchumni tribe has with the Visalia Friends Meeting House on their Quaker Oaks farm. We also work with the Wauchumni tribe. Our Kauai Oaks Preserve is just adjacent to that farm. And so we have members of the Wauchumni tribe who are coming onto our preserve to collect culturally important plants for basket weaving and other uses, as well as working within our education programs to educate the young people who come to our field trips, who are participating in our programs about that traditional ecological knowledge. And then lastly, regarding conservation of private lands, one of the things, we don't have a successful project yet, but we're working on it, is working with some of these tribal nonprofits that Roman mentioned for the non-federally recognized tribes to be able to help them acquire land. It's something that we're really invested in, and we're really hoping that we'll see some success there in the coming years. I want to talk a little bit more about conservation of private working lands. This is one of the pieces that's really at the heart of our work. So what we do is we support landowners in protecting their farms and ranches through conservation easements, through sustainable land management practices, and through regenerative agricultural strategies. Conservation easements are voluntary, legally binding agreements that limit certain types of development on private land to protect its agricultural or ecological value. Landowners retain ownership and the right to farm, while ensuring that the land remains in agriculture for future generations. These agreements help balance economic vitality with conservation priorities, making them a critical tool in sustaining working lands. Some lands in our region will need to transition away from irrigated farming, while others will benefit from long-term conservation strategies. The key is striking the right balance, helping farmers and ranchers implement strategies that benefit their businesses while ensuring sustainability. So I want to get a quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with multi-benefit land repurposing or the multi-benefit land repurposing program? Okay, so a few, great. So this is a concept. The idea is that as we are trying to achieve sustainability within our region, trying to achieve sustainable use of our groundwater, some lands will need to be repurposed. And that ideally we can do this if we're thoughtful and intentional, and if we work together, we can do this in ways that create multiple benefits on these lands. The Department of Conservation created a grant program called the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program. And we're now 2 grantee cohorts into this. And this is a program that helps communities plan to transition agricultural lands in ways that really benefit water conservation, habitat restoration, and long-term sustainability. One of the things that we want to avoid would be an outcome where lands are sort of haphazardly coming out of production, and it's not in a way that benefits our region as a whole. So example of repurposing generally is the recharge basin at Kauai Oaks Preserve, which is shown there in the photo. This is actually a really great early example of multi-benefit land repurposing because it happened before the advent of this grant program. But it's a former plum orchard. It was donated to our organization and it was repurposed for groundwater recharge. It's kind of in the northwest corner of our preserve. And this project began in 2017 in collaboration between Sequoia Riverlands Trust and Kauai Delta Water Conservation District and Greater Kauai Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Now, this preserve, it's our most popular preserve. It's just east of Visalia. It receives tens of thousands of visitors per year. And the recharge basin is also able to take on excess water pumped from nearby Deep Creek, as well as providing habitat and recreational benefits. Just across Deep Creek is Quaker Oaks Farm, which I mentioned earlier, where the Wauchumni had their farming operation. They also have a multi-benefit land repurposing project. Theirs is funded through the Kauai Subbasin MLRP grant. And their project is called the Wuknayin Riparian Wetland and Habitat Restoration Project. And what that's going to do, it's also in collaboration with the Water Conservation District and the GSA. It's going to allow them to pump water out of Deep Creek back onto the land to restore some tules that are really important to them there, as well as cultivate other plants for cultural uses. So it's really exciting as a concept, the way that we can be working together to bring these multiple uses onto the land in ways that benefit not only our overall groundwater budget, but also plants, animals, biodiversity, and human uses as well. So talking a little bit more about this multi-benefit land repurposing program, SRT is actively involved in MLRP block grants in the Kauai, Tule, and Westland subbasins, working with a broad network of partners. Each of these grantees has brought together, and you'll see this is a map of all of the grantees minus one, which is too far north to be on this particular snapshot of the map. But each of these grantees has brought together a wide variety of partners in order to make their projects successful. And the key goal here is to reduce groundwater dependence while supporting community, economic, and ecological sustainability. Really key to this is building strong relationships, because lasting change is only going to happen through collaboration and trust. One example of this that gives us a chance to explore what might be possible if we're able to really do this at scale is the Flying Dragon Ranch project. Just take a moment, absorb the awesomeness of the name, Flying Dragon. We didn't come up with it. It was the name of the property originally, but it's a partnership between our organization and East Kauai Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And it's currently in the planning and permitting stage. It's going to repurpose 31 acres of citrus and 27 acres of open land along Cottonwood Creek near Seville in Tulare County to create riparian habitat with public access, groundwater recharge, and flood control basins. This project is going to be in tandem with a linear recharge project on Cottonwood Creek, which is in development by East Kauai GSA. So in addition to reducing groundwater use and generating groundwater recharge, Flying Dragon will provide conservation and public recreation benefits, and as well as educational opportunities for the communities of Seville and Yedem. Again, just an example of what we can do when we're all working together and when we're able to bring in the funding at levels necessary to support the scale of the change that we're really looking at here. And that's where Sierra-San Joaquin Jobs First comes in. So I know you've heard Ashley talk about that, and Roman and David as well. This S2J2 initiative is a really amazing regional strategy. We're so excited about it. We've been engaged in it almost from the beginning on local tables, regional tables, and working together. We're really excited about the possibility of creating green jobs and restoration, stewardship, and sustainable agriculture, and giving people even more hands-on opportunities to support land transitions while building careers in conservation. So in December of 2024, SRT was honored to receive a Catalyst grant from the Sierra-San Joaquin Jobs First initiative. And our project really has three focus areas. The first is building up our plant nursery, our native plant nursery at our Dry Creek Preserve, which is just east of Wood Lake. We are anticipating that as land use transitions occur over the next time period, there will be a need for more native plants to help support habitat restoration projects. And so we're hoping to be a part of that. This native plant nursery has been in use for over a decade. We actually created it when we were restoring that property. It used to be a gravel pit mine, and then it was donated to us, and we've restored it to its native sycamores and cottonwoods. It's really beautiful. But we've never really been able to invest in this nursery the way that's needed in order to help it fulfill the role that we know that it can play. And so this is going to enable us to build a greenhouse as well as invest in our staff to really scale up the work that we're doing there. And in addition, we're going to be building out some workforce programs. Sort of the seed of this is already there in our high school programs, our high school internships, the curriculum that we have, but we'll be partnering with some local workforce development partners to really build that up, both workforce programs at the native plant nursery, as well as training and jobs in land stewardship on our preserves. And then lastly, there's the Regional Restoration Planning and Partnership Initiative, which I'll discuss in more detail in the next slide. So as David mentioned, planning is how we navigate among competing land uses. And in order to ensure that land transitions are strategic, equitable, and ecologically sound, we really need some regional frameworks. And one way to think about this regional restoration planning and partnership is sort of nested under the broader planning effort that David was describing in his presentation. We're really excited about this opportunity to convene partners in conservation, folks who would be implementing projects, folks who would be advocating, convening, bringing other people together to talk about what are the existing plans that are in place that we can bring together, and how can we create something that's new and actionable to bridge from where we are today to where we're really bringing up projects at scale on the land. This project also includes a really robust community engagement component. And this is where we'll be working with tribes within the 4-county S2J2 region, as well as other communities within the region, to hear from them what their needs and desires are for the lands and how that can be incorporated into this overall planning effort. And then lastly, we'll be working with a planning team to produce the document or documents that ultimately we're going to be handing off to CBCF a little over a year from now. And getting ready to, again, start bringing these projects on the land, helping to bring more funding to the region. So the prospect of these transitions that we're facing in our region is daunting, but we and our partners are really embracing the change and the opportunities that it can create. Our sights are set on a future where working lands are not only sustained, but thrive, and that they're rooted in resilience for generations to come. Thank you so much.
Well, that was a lot. Yeah. 9 million acres in this 4-county area. It's about 10% of the state's land mass. It is a really consequential part of California, both because of the landscape as well as because of the growing population, the youth of the population, et cetera. So anyway, we just said a lot of words. So here's what I'm going to suggest to my colleagues on the panel. I think y'all need some time at your tables. We do something at CBCF called Elbow Buddies. I think I just like you to spend a few minutes, talk to the people next to you. Would love to hear at the table what comes up for you as you listen to all this information. It could be one very narrow thread. Gosh, I'm really stuck on this slide that I saw that Roman presented. I can't stop thinking about this one thing. It could be something very complex when you consider all the things that are coming together here in what our panelists have presented. But I want you to just literally react to the folks around your table. What comes up for you as you have sat now and listened for the last 45 minutes? What's coming up for you? I'm going to check back in about 5 minutes. So go ahead, turn to your tables and have a conversation. All right. That is your 5-minute mark. 5-minute mark. Let's bring it back to the whole group here. Special nod to our DJ in the back with some extra special meeting music. If you noticed the little music that was playing, that was really fun. Thank you for that, Mr. Sound Engineer. All right. So what did you hear at your tables? Like what was coming up for you all? We're going to popcorn this around. I see we do have a microphone that's roving. I'm also not opposed to people raising their hand and yelling it out. Paul in the back, get us going.
First, thanks to all of the panelists. Just really a great broad spectrum look at our lands issues. I come to this with a background of working with the San Joaquin River Conservancy for 10 years and also working with the Boys and Girls Club. We had 2 educators, by the way, at our table. My question, I think, is public access. And I'm going to pick on David, I think, because we find, and I think this is pretty common if you look at all of our counties, we have these multi-jurisdictional situations going on. Your maps are great from the part of land use, but jurisdictionally, we almost all have these huge state waterways that are going through. And when we try, I think, to encourage the next generations to understand the rural and the outdoor aspects of our county, we have trouble getting public access. Right now, we have a real difficult time in the San Joaquin River with one of the few bridges we have across the San Joaquin has been deemed unsafe. It goes across the state waterway. We can't seem to get it. It's just getting shut down, and therefore the public has no way of working. We have large urban populations on the Fresno side. We have a new development on the Madera side that's growing very rapidly. So I think, David, are there ways that we could get regional jurisdiction and be able to create access policies around what we want to do with the land? versus
Hmm.
having to deal with so many layers of state
You know what?
bureaucracy.
And Paul, David, I'm gonna ask you to answer that. And great to kick us off. However, I don't want to go too deep yet into like Q&A. I'd love to just hear from the tables what was coming up, right? So jurisdictional issues around the complexities of all this. You want to chime in just real quick, and then we're
Yeah,
gonna get back to feedback from the tables. What are you hearing? What are you thinking? Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I'll just keep it at a high level, which is, I mean, it's an ownership issue, really, right? I mean, if say it was owned by the state or by the region and it was, deemed to be parkland, you wouldn't have an access question. A lot of that land is privately owned and, those landowners don't want people accessing their land. So I hate to oversimplify it, but it does, and maybe Logan can back me up, but it comes down to ownership, right? Who's controlling the land? What are they doing with it? And are they allowing people on it? And maybe the question is, how do you build coalitions, state, local, public, private, to create corridors that share access? Maybe that's the regional conversation to have, because it is cross-jurisdictional and it's also going to be public and private.
And that for sure, as I was listening to these three, was coming up for me is like the complexity of making all these things go in the same direction when there are thousands, if not more, points of control and resource. I mean, it is a staggering thought. So I want to come back to that in a minute of like, how do you actually do that as a body of people? That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here is creating a center of gravity that allows people to move forward together. Other things that you were hearing at your table, doesn't have to be a question, just like what was coming up. I see someone in the back and then we'll come here to the front. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Crystal Sufanction. I thought what was interesting is I hearkened back to the late 90s when we created this plan or report called the Landscape of Choice. And that was about, Fresno doing more of that infilling, tighter neighborhoods so that you could protect the farmland or agriculture. And now what's interesting is we have a plan to talk about what are we going to do to change out agriculture to other purposes. Just interesting perspective how things have changed from then to now.
Yes, that's a great recent history, a real milestone for our community of starting to bring these different sectors and pieces together, the landscape of choice. I remember that. All right. Yes, sir.
Okay, two things. One, we have two people from Utah who are very interested in all this stuff, and they were incredibly impressed with the maps and the concept of regional planning for the different uses of land. And they would like to talk to you about it because they're very interested in that. So first of all, kudos to you. But secondly, I'll ask a pain in the ass political science question, which is great plans, guys. How do you get people to do it? What are the mechanisms to get people not only to coordinate, which was brought up, but how do you get them to change their land use and to take on recharging land and all that? Because that's something that's coming up in a lot of places in the state, not just here.
That's it. Who are the political scientists in the room? Who can, we've got several. Yes, and following on Paul's comment about like all these jurisdictional issues. Okay, let's touch on that again. And I have a couple thoughts. David, I see your.
Yeah, this is a little crass, but it's the Carville to Clinton statement. It's the economy, stupid. And that's why what we're showing you today is that you don't have to develop the land or, do huge manufacturing on it or whatever for it to have value and for it to have ongoing value. And so I think, this paradigm shift, this, vibe shift, I guess is the new term, is that we do view the landscape differently. We view it as one, it has intrinsic value, but there are people out there who think that this is crass to say, but it also has economic value. And look, it's just the way the world turns right now. And so let's then leverage the value that's in that landscape and use it as a way to drive a different conversation amongst yourselves. It starts here, right? And your conversations then, if they continue to telegraph with other people, hopefully they start to make their way to the decision makers, and then the decision makers start to talk to the landowners. And we have, it sounds Pollyannish, and maybe it is, but it starts with a vision, or it starts with an idea, and hopefully that grows. And those ideas need to be different than, what we've been doing in the past. We can't drive down the highway looking in the rearview mirror. That's an accident.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up on that point right there because you mentioned the word vision, and that's exactly what was coming to mind for me too. I'll invoke my favorite expression. Fresnans are tired of hearing me say it, and yet here I go again. The expression is this: vision gives pain purpose. Having worked in government and worked with the tools of governmental authority over land use issues, but still the reality of private property rights in our nation. I know what it feels like to be like, yes, but we get to pass a general plan every 5 years and we get to zone this. And yeah, you got to do your stakeholder, I understand what that feels like. But I'll also say this: we're working right now, those 4 counties and the probably a couple dozen cities and a number, probably another at least 2 dozen unincorporated communities and townships, et cetera. Here's the way we're managing this right now. It's like we are not seeking governmental power, control, or authority. We're not doing that. Because I know that I'd spend the rest of my life, we would spend the rest of our lives fighting for power, fighting over control, and nothing would happen. So we're literally just like, that's there. We're not concerned about that. We are honoring and recognizing the existing governmental power that already exists, working with those staff members to say, hey, would you come to the table? And are these big questions, do you see that these are impacting your community too? And it's aligning people to strategic questions in the hope that a strategic vision could manifest that inspires people to say, oh, I'll go through some pain. I'll work on some legislation that could enable that. I'll work on the fundraising, just put kind of cobbling all that together. I don't know any other way to proceed in this state and in this time other than you've got to have folks who are drawn to the potential of a new vision. And I'll have to say, one thing I think that our region contributes to the broader state conversation in California is we are hungry and desperate for change. Not to every single person. There are plenty of people who are doing fine and maybe are a little bit unaware or not inspired by this conversation. But there are a lot of people here who are like, man, where we're at is not okay. Change is needed here. We've got to do something differently. And so it's creating this opportunity for a whole bunch of collaborative and strategic partnerships to pop up that may not be exactly as ripe in other parts of California. So anyway, it's just it is a very social thing to try to navigate all these things. I want to hear from some more tables. I also have a question for Roman before he has to go, and I'm watching the clock because he's got carpool and I've been there. So anyway, but let's hear from at least 1 or 2 more. What came up for you as you were listening to these comments, and then we'll maybe do a closeout question for the panelists. Other things that you're like, God, I just need to say this, and I'm. Are you raising your hand, sir? Or okay, so we have one here, and then Felicia.
Hi, Alex Sheriffs. I just wanted to note how important the tribal groups have been in promoting sustainability. And there are numerous examples, but one of the most recent would be looking at what's going on with the Eel River that many people forget. That's the 3rd largest watershed in California. And I am sure we would be nowhere near what's been accomplished up there without the involvement of the tribes and their leadership in that.
Yep. I love that you said that. And that I've got a follow-on question for Roman that just kind of want to get your perspective to wrap us up here in a second. Felicia, let's hear from you, and then we'll do that. Thank you for making that point.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just think we were struck by how substantial the panel was. You said a lot of words, but they were really good words. And we all had different takes from the community foundation, someone really involved in it, from observing the planning stuff, having the engagement of tribes and having the land repurposing and the other work, nature-based, the fact that you pulled it all together in such a nice way. And it's just such an antidote to what you see in the headlines and in the talking class, which is all very simplistic and somebody else's fault. So very inspiring.
Thank you. I'll take that. We receive that as encouragement in our region. Roman, I'm curious, just as I'll just back up one step and say this. I've recently gotten to work with you a little bit. We've only met in the last year, I would say, maybe a little bit more. But I'll tell you, every time I'm around you, I get this sense of peace and calm and inspiration. I'm like, that dude is carrying something so powerful. And I felt it again today as you were speaking. And I was trying to imagine living, like walking in your shoes and in your community's shoes. And I was trying to imagine, here you are standing for, connecting to 7 generations past, 7 generations forward, such a starkly different culture than what is all around you. How in the world do you manage that? I don't know what I would, I don't think I could do that. And I just help us. How do you manage that cultural conflict all around you all the time?
I think Mr. Masamoto put it really good when he was talking about takers and givers with the land. And I think when I'm in a Western setting, it's very much like that. How can we develop it? We're talking about economics. We're talking about investment. Tribes are talking about creating their own tribal banks, getting into real estate. But then at the same time, tribally speaking, no matter what happens, long after America comes and goes, the tribal people will still be here, and we will still say, no matter what the condition is of the land, even if it's at its very worst, we'll still feel it to our core that it's our responsibility to love it back to health. And so that's really a driving force of, I guess, for me, my mother has always taught us as children, we send you to college to learn how to think like them, but not act like them. And so that's really I see that dichotomy in our tribes that are more affluent than those that are not, because they have those, they have now, some sort of a capital, wealth that'll put them at the seats of the table. But then those tribes that do not, they really gravitate towards their ways of lives, their culture, their religion, and their language. And it's not coincidence, I think, that if you look at studies that I've seen, where more people who receive more money from their casino share revenue, the less culture they retain. And versus those that don't have those, they seem to retain a lot more and seem to practice a lot more. And it's because all they have are those things, and they don't have those things if they don't have land. And so it's very important that we have access to land, and it's very important to have partners like you folks to help us gain that access. So I guess, I hope that answers your question of code switching, of going from one place to another. You're really very cognizant of everywhere you're at, but trying to remain true to yourself. And that's acknowledging that I'm not a traditional person, that I'm an urban native person with traditional tendencies. But if I was a traditional person, I wouldn't even be here with you folks. I'd be out there just living my best dream. So understanding that and understanding my role, I guess that's how I try to move forward.
So beautiful. So well said. I think we're going to end it right there. We will love the land back to a healed place.
Yes.
And that is it right there. All right. Thank you all so much. And again, welcome to the Central Valley for those of you who are here for the first time, and best of luck with the rest of your conference.